Number 5 on this list is the Templo Mayor ruins. So a church is typically defined as a place for Christian worship, but let's loosen up that definition just a little bit and start thinking about it as a building or landmark where people would have worshipped higher beings. If we start thinking about it like that, then the Templo Mayor ruins can certainly qualify. Mexico has a lot of haunted spots, but this is at the top of their list for sure. Gaurav Gupta writes, this archaeological site in Mexico has a blood-soaked past. It is a haunted Aztec civilization site that has made its presence felt throughout the time. Around 4,000 people were brutally killed to please Aztec gods. The priests would cut out the beating hearts from the victims' chests and then throw their lifeless bodies on the stairs of the Aztec temple. Aztec's last emperor, Cuauhtémoc, made his last stand invading Spanish armies before he was tortured and killed. This Aztec is now a museum, and tourists report strange sensational feelings and sightings of shadow figures. 4,000 people were likely sacrificed here. That is a truly absurd amount of sacrifices. Then throw on the fact that a great battle took place here, and you end up with so much death. Needless to say, the spirits of those that passed have never really left. Glowing orbs are always spotted at this place, especially in the evening. There have been reports of these glowing orbs touching the people and transporting them to the world of the dead. They go into a hypnotic state and can't move, sort of like what happens to people in the latest season of Stranger Things, if any of you have watched that. They have a very hard time explaining what has happened to them after the fact, but they know that it was the dead. This is accompanied by a giant beam of light that flashes into the sky. There is evil here, there just has to be. All of the death that has transpired over the years has left a horrible stain on this place, and evil has congregated here. No one knows what type of evil or what spirit is behind this, but just know that this is a scary place that you should probably avoid. Number 4 on this list is the Ness Church. Ness Church is a Norwegian church that is no longer operating. It's a collection of ruins now and a very popular spot for ghost hunters. The ghost hunters have discovered that electronic equipment, or your standard cell phone, isn't going to do so hot in this church. For whatever reason, the second that you bring anything like that in, it just completely shuts down. If one wants to have an electronic device here, then it needs to be specifically made to withstand strong spiritual energy. The most popular myth surrounding the ghostly presence that resides here is a priest named Jacob Christian Finnegan. This was a priest who presided over this church from 1800 to 1837. Apparently, he suffered a very grim fate here along with his children. It's thought that he and his children were killed by an evil gang who came through the church looting it. They killed the priest and then, ever so cruelly, bricked his children up and left them to die. This is only one variation of the tale though, because one legend actually says that the priest did this to his kids himself. Regardless of which one is historically accurate, they're both pretty bad. The screams of these children are frequently accompanied by the sighting of this priest. It's said that he will stalk those who come here and follow them around, giving them a horribly uneasy feeling. It's very likely that if you go by yourself, this ghostly priest will attack you and could do some serious damage. Maybe he wasn't evil when he was alive, but he certainly is now. Number 3 on this list is Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard. As the name Greyfriars might hint, this church is located in Scotland. History Hit says, with the kirk tracing its origin to 1598 and the graveyard dating back even further to the 1560s, Greyfriars Kirk and Kirkyard in Edinburgh is said to be one of the most haunted religious sites in the world. Known for body snatching and violent ghosts, the famously fearsome site has even been referred to by Scottish poet Robert Louis Stevenson. The site's most famous ghost is the Mackenzie poltergeist. George Mackenzie, who was known during his lifetime as a ruthless persecutor of Scottish Covenanters, a Presbyterian movement in the 17th century. His spirit was reportedly released in 1999 when a homeless man looking for somewhere to sleep broke into his final resting place, the Black Mausoleum. Next to this mausoleum is the former Covenanters prison, which housed some 1,200 members of a failed anti-government revolution in 1679. Only 257 prisoners came out alive, with the remaining dead said to haunt the churchyard. The negative energy that surrounds this church is said to be so strong that it's attracted some pretty powerful beings. The devil is the one being that people associate with this place. Some believe that this church is actually a secret lair for the devil, that these other demonic spirits are working to keep us away from this place so the devil can fulfill his evil agenda. If this is the case, then I think that we should do as the devil wants and leave it alone. Number 2 on this list is Borley Rectory. Built in 1863 in England, this is one of the most famous haunted churches in the world. We can thank the personalities of Ed and Lorraine Warren for bringing it into the spotlight, as they had quite the experience at this church back in the day. The horror stories began back in 1929. A journalist named V.C. Wall was a photographer in the woods nearby the rectory, taking pictures one evening when they saw something very strange. From the outside, the rectory looked like it had a light on, but if you walked inside, it was all dark. Wall also saw the ghost of a nun that evening walking around the graveyard, looking as eerie as you may expect. After they told people about this story, some ghost hunters came forward and provided an explanation. Back in the 1300s, there was a monastery here. At this monastery, a monk had a relationship with a nun. This was found out and resulted in deadly punishment for both people. The nun got it particularly bad though, because she was bricked up alive in the convent walls and left there to die. The 1929 story was the big one that kicked everything off, but after this happened, other stories started emerging. Stories about this land before the rectory was even built. Apparently this area of land was always haunted and dealing with ghostly presences. Strange rapping sounds, bells ringing, objects moving and flying around without anyone touching them are all very common sights at the Borley Rectory. The ghost of this nun is also a regular character here, making herself known to newcomers quite often. You may even see the ghost coach. A headless phantom coach driver is said to be around the area and will approach people every now and again and take them away. Why anyone would ever get into a coach driven by a headless ghost is beyond me, but apparently it happens. Everything about this rectory and land is evil, and it needs to be avoided. And finally, number 1 on this list is Nidaros Cathedral. This is not only Norway's most important cathedral, but also one of the most haunted as well. I mean, in all honesty, it literally looks like Dracula's castle if Dracula's castle was a cathedral. It was constructed in the 1300s, but the actual hauntings didn't begin until relatively recently in its lifetime. In 1924, Bishop Mary Gleditch saw something pretty scary and gruesome. The ghost of a monk who had a massive slash directly across his neck. Ever since that day, this monk is seen very regularly. Nobody knows why though. People and historians have looked through the history of this cathedral and can't seem to find any record of a big monk population ever staying here. However, it doesn't make sense that this random monk ghost would just show up out of nowhere, so you have to imagine that he was here at some point before. You also have to imagine that he got that cut on his neck here too. All of it is very dark and mysterious and makes you wonder what else happened here that wasn't documented.
Coming in at 5, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, Key West, Florida. St. Paul's Church is the 4th church structure built by St. Paul's between the 1800s and early 1900s. And though it may look bright and new, this is because the church has been rebuilt numerous, and I mean numerous times. The original church, made of coral rock, was completed in 1839. However, it was destroyed during the Havana hurricane in 1846 and was rebuilt in 1848. Once again though, the church was destroyed when the Great Fire of Key West struck in 1886. However, by some good fortune, the rectory survived unscathed, and the rebuilding once again began on the 3rd structure, ending in 1887. However, disaster struck once again though in 1909 when the church was destroyed by a powerful hurricane. This time though, the parish hall survived, as well as the rectory. The church was once again rebuilt and construction was completed in 1919. However, during all of these rebuilds, it was discovered that the site was once a Seminole burial ground, with the land being previously owned by the Fleming family before the church was built, and the land was only granted after the widow was assured her husband's remains that were interred on the land would not be disturbed. However, this is where it gets spooky. Legend has it that the promise was broken and the widow's husband, John William Charles Fleming, was removed from the site. Spookier still, according to some locals, his ghost still wanders the site. Other apparitions have been reported as well in the graveyard, one being a ghostly group of children who were killed in a fire set by a jealous deacon who was taking revenge on his unfaithful wife. Yeah, yikes. Coming in at 4, St Andrews on the Red, Selkirk, Canada. Built between 1845 and 1849 to serve the local community of retired Hudson Bay Company personnel, this church is located in a small suburb of Winnipeg, located on a lightly forested hill with an incredibly impressive Gothic design. It is by far the oldest stone church in Western Canada and has definitely had its fair share of paranormal activity. The church became an old campfire story among young teens and rebellious kids who would dare their friends to walk backwards around the church 3 times, with the expectation that you would disappear. Now of course that never actually happened, but it was still a frightening tale to tell children so they didn't wander through the cemetery at night. Now what makes this church truly chilling is that victims of influenza, diphtheria, typhoid and tuberculosis from the early colonial era were interred here, and their restless spirits are said to still wander the grounds of the church. Specifically, some visitors have reported disembodied red eyes floating through the cemetery, organs playing spontaneously, as well as a mysterious woman cloaked in white who is known to rattle the gates of the church. If you dare, you can take a self-guided tour of the church located in Selkirk, Canada. Coming in at 3, St Michan's Church, Dublin, Ireland. This is an Anglican church built on the site of an early Norse chapel from 1095, with the current structure dating back to 1686, undertaken by William Robinson. As it stands, this church is the only parish church on the north side of the River Liffey, surviving from a Viking foundation. Now the exterior of the church is nothing to write home about, however the interior is what we're going to be discussing, specifically the vaults. The vaults of St Michan's contain a large amount of mummified remains, with the walls of the vaults containing limestone, thus keeping the air dry and creating ideal conditions for preservation. Among the remains of the 400-year-old body of a nun, a 6.5-foot man believed to have been a crusader, a boy with a severed right hand and feet, and Henry and John Shears, who took part in the 1798 rebellion. Unfortunately, a number of the crypts in the church's vaults were damaged by vandals in 1996 and once again in 2019. After the most recent event, the church has stated that several mummified remains were desecrated by vandals, including the remains of the nun and the crusader. Tours used to be open, however after the recent incident they have been temporarily shut down. Not only will you be dealing with the enraged spirits of the dead when visiting this church, but also the despicable living. Coming in at 2, Cathedral of the Assumption of Our Lady, Guadalajara, Mexico. Also known as the Guadalajara Cathedral, this is a Roman Catholic cathedral of the Archdiocese of Guadalajara and was built in 1541 in the Spanish Renaissance style with neo-Gothic spires. However, though the building is beautiful, it has been plagued by hauntings and tragic events. On May 30th, 1574, during Mass, neighbours fired shots into the air. Some of the bullets fell onto the cathedral and started a fire, ultimately damaging the building. A second tragic event struck in 1818 when an earthquake shook the city, causing the towers and dome to collapse. The cathedral was of course repaired, however it continues to be in danger. It was damaged by earthquakes in 1932, 1957, 1985, 1995 and 2003. However, outside of natural disasters, the cathedral also has a ghostly side to it. One of the most popular attractions is of course the Crypt of Archbishops, which is truly chilling. However, more chilling still are the mummified bodies on display there, with one dating back to the 1700s, which belongs to a child that was killed for converting to Catholicism. Some visitors to the cathedral have claimed that they have seen her eyes blink and have witnessed her hair move. Very spooky indeed. And finally, coming in at number 1, St Thomas Anglican Parish of Mulgoa, New South Wales, Australia. Designed by Reverend Thomas Mackison and built from 1836 to 1838, this church is incredibly striking with a Gothic revival design and is said to be one of the most haunted churches in not just Australia, but in the world. Though the church is youthful in appearance and located in a semi-rural area, it is hiding an incredibly dark and tragic history. Legend has it that 2 young boys died in a fire in the bell tower of the church after a prank went horribly wrong. Since that fateful day, any kind of light, even candles, anger the spirits of the boys' restless spirits. According to a Facebook group, Haunted Places of Sydney, they say, I quote, "There's an urban legend that claims that if you drive laps around the church at night, the headlights of your car will switch off, and and if you continue, the car will stall. However, it isn't just the church's legend that's creepy. The surrounding cemetery is also filled with monuments that date back almost 200 years ago. With monuments that date back almost 200 years, adding to the creepy factor. As of right now, the church is owned by Anglican Church Property Trust and was added to the New South Wales State Heritage Register on April 2nd, 1999.
Number 5 on this list is Hallstatt Carner. Hallstatt Carner is one weird church, man, let me tell you. I'm all about unique and cool decorations, but human body parts? Kinda where I draw the line, guys. Discovery.com says, many bone churches and ossuaries are decorated with femurs and pelvises, but at Hallstatt Carner, the skulls themselves are decorated. More than 600 of the skulls on display in this Benhaus, also known as Bone House in English, bear their former owners' names, professions, and the date of their death. Many are also adorned with decorative garlands and flowers. But perhaps what makes this bone church stand out the most is the fact that the most recent remains to be interred here belong to a woman who passed away in 1983 after having requested the Benhaus as her final resting place. What's more, she might not be the last because the church is still open to receiving similar requests. So yeah, the dark secret here is that there is literal bones still being added. 1983 is really not that long ago when you think about it, and like the article suggests, that's probably not the last person to have been thrown into this array of skeletons. I guess it isn't, but it feels like this should be illegal or something. At the very least, it's just super weird. Like, why is a bunch of dead bodies and bones and stuff bringing anyone closer to God? Isn't the whole point of church to connect with your spiritual side? Not get grossed out by a bunch of dead people who you might have even known at one point. The church is located in Austria and has got to be one of the scariest churches in that country for sure. Unless you want your bones to be added to some religious display, I would stay away from this place. Number 4 on this list is the St. Louis Cathedral, a beautiful church like many on this list, which is riddled with spirits. The list first says, like the city it serves, the St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans is a font of strange myths and legends. Originally built by the city's French rulers, the modern cathedral wasn't completed until the 1850s. According to lore, the ghosts of the old structure came along for the ride. One of the cathedral's better known ghosts, Père Dagobert, was an 18th century priest. Dagobert was renowned for his kindness, especially his willingness to treat the poor and terminally ill. During the 1760s, several members of his congregation decided to revolt against the city's new Spanish rulers. The mainly French and Creole rebels successfully pushed the initial Spanish force out of the city, but a larger force later managed to claim New Orleans for the Spanish king. Infuriated by the earlier rebellion, Irish-Spanish governor Alejandro O'Reilly decided to not only execute the rebels, but also leave their rotting bodies on the doorstep of the St. Louis Cathedral. As a devout Catholic, Dagobert could not stand by while Catholic bodies were so roughly treated. After failing to get O'Reilly's permission to properly bury the bodies, Dagobert led a funeral procession down to St. Peter's Cemetery and placed the slain men in unmarked graves. Dagobert's successor, a Spanish priest named Pierre Antoine, is also said to haunt the cathedral. More intriguingly, Antoine's friend, voodoo priestess Mary Laveau, who often prayed at the church during her lifetime, is also considered to be one of the many spirits inside the cathedral. So we got voodoo priestesses, unmarked haunted graves, multiple spirits of bodies that were buried improperly. This church is just one big mess. Many people think that there are also a bunch of other secrets that this place has that we don't know about. Like this was a spot for a secret society hundreds of years ago who performed some very questionable rituals, and that's why this place is as haunted as it is. Whatever really happened here, we know it was dark and we know that it left its mark. Number 3 on this list is Egg Hill Church. This church was home to one of the worst tragedies a church has ever been host to. I've never been a real churchgoer myself, but from my understanding, love, life, spirituality, all of this is supposed to be in the air when you go, and the whole reason for doing so. Death and hate and violence, that's all supposed to be left at the door. Pennsylvania's Egg Hill Church didn't quite do that. Instead, they invited death into the church on one particular Halloween night. Many years ago, the whole community gathered into the church on Halloween. The priest passed around bread and wine as is customary, but this bread and wine was a little off. In fact, it was very off. So off that everyone who had it died. It was poisoned. It's unknown whether the town had collectively decided to end their lives together that night or if this was all the priest's doing, but either way, tens to hundreds of people's bodies lay lifeless on the ground when it was all said and done. Now, what are we left with? Well, the ghosts of all of these people, obviously. Even worse than that, the spirit of this evil priest still lingers here too, and apparently, he isn't done with the living. He's said to be very dangerous and wants to drag visitors down with him and take their life. This whole story is pretty much as dark as you can get, and it's no wonder the place is totally messed up today. Number 2 on this list is St. Nicholas Church. Hey, it's me. It just so happens that my church is haunted by a dozen spirits. Great. List first says St. Nicholas Church is practically haunted by default. That's because the village of Pluckley, its home, is reputably the most haunted locale in all of England. The Kent village is home to the Watercress woman, who occupies the Pinnock Bridge, and to the ghost of a schoolmaster who committed in front of his pupils. According to a conservative estimate, Pluckley contains no fewer than 12 active spirits. The church itself is said to be the home of both the beautiful ghost of Lady Daring and the Lady in Red, a ghost who searches the adjacent churchyard for her lost baby. The ghost of a former miller who worked in the area is also said to haunt the churchyard in search of a long-lost love. Also, the ghost of a monk at nearby Greystone's house is also said to be seen during the night. Finally, visitors to St. Nicholas have reported seeing lights in the church's windows when no one was inside. So we have another church with just a plethora of horrible things. Someone taking their own life, a missing a man who has lost his loved one. My question is, why did all of this happen at this one church? Like, what really caused all of this to transpire in the first place? Are we just supposed to believe that it's all coincidence, or is there actually something more afoot here? I think that's the real secret, and sadly, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to find the true answer. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Andres on the Red. Just that name alone. On the Red. Like, of course this place had to have some dark secrets. List first says St. Andrews on the Red, completed in 1849, is located in the town of Selkirk, which is more or less a suburb of Winnipeg. It's the oldest stone church in Western Canada, and it may be the region's most haunted thanks to the spirits of former plague victims. Other apparitions are said to populate the church's graveyard. Eyewitnesses have reported seeing a ghostly man clad in black and a mysterious woman in white. Also, a disembodied pair of red eyes have startled the visitors in the past, while a ghost car has been noted not far from the church's main entrance. If you're thinking about visiting the church or graveyard, be wary. Those who've claimed to have seen the various apparitions also reported having terrible nightmares the following nights. Most of these nightmares apparently involved the gates of the cemetery, which rattle even though no hands are seen shaking them. Some people can't shake these nightmares either. The occasional individual will have these persist for months or even years. I'm sure that the architecture and natural beauty is nice and all, but I'm not trying to risk nightmares for a year to see it. I do wonder what happened to those gates though. Is it some weird thing with the wind that's causing it, or is it what people suggest, some type of ghostly intervention? I tend to think some sort of spirit has to be involved, considering the thing with the nightmares happens as well, but you gotta wonder who. Sometimes I really do think that being a paranormal investigator would be awesome, because you could get to the bottom of these things, but then again, that's a pretty unforgiving profession. Number 5 on this list is Rosslyn Chapel. Rosslyn Chapel is located in Scotland and is arguably the most haunted church in that country. This chapel has a ton of ghostly legends surrounding it that lead to the lore of its hauntings. The Rosslyn Chapel actually writes themselves. In July 2006, a group of actors were rehearsing in the chapel for a play they were about to do at the Edinburgh Festival. One said that he saw a fairy-like figure in the grounds of the building. Another was locking up the chapel at the end of the rehearsal, as he was doing so, heard the voice of a child in the crypt. Obviously, he didn't want to lock the child in overnight, so he went down to the crypt to get the child, but found that there was no one there. Another tale says that the ghost of a white lady haunts Rosslyn Chapel. Legend has it that she is a girl from the St. Clair family who was bewitched by an evil spell and sleeps in an enchanted chamber. Here, she is waiting to be rescued by a knight. Once rescued, the spell upon her will be broken and the knight will be granted great treasures. And yet another tale is of a phantom dog which roams the grounds around the chapel, and on stormy nights its ghostly barking can be heard. We got a fairy, we got a child, we got spells, we got a dog. This chapel has everything that a paranormal lover could ever want. They also didn't mention in that article about the ghosts of the monks that supposedly live there. This used to be an area where a bunch of monks would meet while they were alive, and it seems as if their ghosts have never left. And the crazy part about all of this is that nobody knows why this church is as haunted as it is. Most places that are tied to spirits have some sort of horror story to go along with them, but there really isn't anything here at all. I suppose it's possible that this church just happened to be built on an area where tons of spiritual energy has gathered. Hit me in the comments down below what you guys think happened to this place to get it like this, cause I'm honestly stumped. Number 4 on this list is the Ness Church. This church is located in Norway and is no longer functioning. It's actually a collection of ruins now and a very popular spot for ghost hunters. The ghosts here are very interesting and unique. It seems as if they have a strong connection to electronic devices, because whenever anyone brings an electronic device to this place, it will immediately stop working and start flashing uncontrollably. If one wants to have an electronic device here, then it needs to be specifically made to withstand strong spiritual energy. The most popular myth surrounding the ghostly presence that resides here is of a priest named Jacob Christian Finnegan. This was a priest who presided over this church from 1800 to 1837. Apparently he suffered a very grim fate here along with his children. People believe that at some point a gang of thieves came to this place and murdered him. Along with his death, they took his children and bricked them up in the church, leaving them there before ransacking the place and taking any valuables. An even darker version of the legend says that the priest did this to his children himself and then promptly hung himself in the church for the locals to later find. I'm not too sure which legend is the true one, but either one would have left their dark mark behind. The screams of these children are frequently accompanied by the sighting of this priest. It's said that he'll stalk those who come here and follow them around, giving them a horribly uneasy feeling. At this point, the church is nothing but a ruin of its former self, and considering the ghostly presence that's waiting for you, I just avoid going altogether. Number 3 on this list is the Church of Agia Theodora of Vasta. This church is located in Greece and is one of the most unique churches you will ever see. Sticking out of this tiny Byzantine church's roof is 17 holly and maple trees. These are sizable trees as well and grow over 30 meters tall. There are 2 versions of how this church got its ghostly presence, and they're described well by Greeker than the Greeks. They write, coming from a family of only girls, Theodora, to save her father from having to join the army, disguised herself as a boy and joined up. Not long after joining the army, a local girl, believing Theodora to be a boy, and when Theodora, for obvious reasons, rejected her, the girl, out of revenge, claimed she was pregnant by Theodora and demanded they be married. For reasons known only to Theodora, she did not reveal her secret, which could have saved her, and refused to marry and was consequently put to death. Version 2 is more or less the same, only this time, Theodora, again disguised as a boy, joined a monastery as a monk. Why she didn't save herself trouble and join a nun's monastery is not known, but anyway, a nun from a nearby monastery fell in love with the monk Theodora, the ending then being the same. Before her execution, Theodora prayed, "Let my body become a church, my blood a river, and my hair the trees." On the very spot where Theodora was executed, a spring gushed forth and grew to become a river which still exists today, as the river which flows beneath the tiny church. So guys, if that legend holds true, then not only is this church haunted by a ghost, but the actual church itself is a ghost. This whole thing was made up by the spirit of Theodora and therefore is basically a living church. Locals have said that because of this reason, the water that flows through this river has some exceptional healing properties and can cure many ailments. Considering this church may actually be the spirit of a person who has passed, I highly recommend saying a prayer before you enter. Number 2 on this list is the Templo Mayor ruins. So a church is typically defined as a place for Christian worship, but if we loosen up the definition a little bit and just make it a building or landmark where people would have worshipped higher beings, then the Templo Mayor ruins can certainly qualify. This temple is one of the most haunted places in Mexico, and for good reason. Gaurav Gupta writes, "This archaeological site in Mexico has a blood-soaked past. It is a haunted Aztec civilization site that has made its presence felt through the time. Around 4,000 people were brutally killed to please Aztec gods. The priests would cut out the beating hearts from the victim's chest and then throw their lifeless bodies on the stairs of the Aztec temple. Aztec's last emperor made his last stand against invading Spanish armies before he was tortured and killed. This Aztec is now a museum, and tourists report strange, sensational feelings and sightings of shadow figures." 4,000 people were likely sacrificed here. That is just an insane number of people to have died over the years. Not to mention the fact that a battle took place here, and that would have caused more loss of life in great numbers. Needless to say, the spirits of those that passed have never really left. Glowing orbs are always spotted at this place, especially in the evening. Some people have also felt contacted by the dead before. Like they go into a deep trance and get a vision of something to come or something happening in a totally other life. From my research, they've had a hard time explaining it, but they know that something paranormal has touched them. Some locals have even noted a bright light flashing up into the sky at this place before. It happens very infrequently and doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason to it, but every now and again you can spot a beam of light blast into the sky. I don't think it's unbelievable to think that this place is deeply haunted with all of the death that's happened here. From my reading, it seems to be decently safe to visit if you go during the daytime, but I'd still say a prayer to those that were lost here. And finally, number 1 is the Chapel of the Dead. This one is really interesting because it's actually a crypt underneath a big church. The Chapel of the Dead, or the Capuchin Crypt, is located in Italy, and it's underneath the Santa Maria della Concenzo dei Cappuccini Church. This church is located in Rome and was built in the 1600s. The church itself wouldn't be haunted if it wasn't for the 3,700 skeletal remains that are found underneath it. Yeah, that's right folks, this Chapel of the Dead has a bunch of dead in it. The remains of these dead are everywhere along the walls and represent different rooms of this underground chapel. There are 6 different rooms that comprise this chapel, and they are as follows: Crypt of the Resurrection, the Mass Chapel, Crypt of the Skulls, Crypt of the Pelvises, Crypt of the Leg Bones and Thigh Bones, and Crypt of the 3 Skeletons. Crypt of the Pelvises, guys, that's an actual thing. I feel like I don't need to go into detail about what sort of remains hang along the walls in that room, but yeah, that's an actual thing. And listen to what Wikipedia writes about the last room, the Crypt of the 3 Skeletons. The center skeleton is enclosed in an oval, the symbol of life coming to birth. In its right hand it holds a scythe, symbol of death, which cuts down everyone like grass in a field, while its left hand holds the scales, symbolizing the good and evil deeds weighed by God when he judges the human soul. A placard in 5 languages declares. Obviously, with all this being said, this place is deeply haunted. It sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie, and from what locals have said, it definitely could be. Severe bad luck can befall those that enter into this chapel, and it seems to be totally random. I could enter it and be like 100% fine, but you could enter it and just have horrible things happen to you for years. It's a really interesting place to read about, but definitely not the sort of place I'd recommend visiting.